So in the last video, we identified that the controller is doing too much. It knows how to go to the server and get boards and move and so on. And it also knows how to call the renderer and to sleep. It's just doing too much. And we want to extract these parts that are communicating to the server from the controller. The first thing we have to do that is extract models. So we are going to create models for our application. The obvious model for this application is a game. And when we create a game, we want to initialize the game's instance variables. But in JavaScript, there is no analog for what we have in Java, where we declare things like int, a row or something. That doesn't make sense in JavaScript. What we can do instead is just say that this identifier, for instance, is equal to null. And when we start using the identifier, in this case we are starting to use it, it just starts to exist. And the same for the board. There is also another model I want to extract in this application, and that's a subtle one, but I think it's worth it. So you can see here that when I am calling move, I have this idea of row and column, and it might appear in other places. And I want to extract this into an object that only contains the data row column. It's just really an object with these two fields, but I want to give this a name, a proper model for this guy. And I'm going to call it coordinate. And the constructor this time receives a row and a column, and then we say this row equals row and this column equals column. It's similar to some code you would write in a constructor in Java, or better yet, you would have your IDE write for you in Java. And now we have this controller. It still receives row and column as arguments because we don't want the event handler for this guy is in the SVG. It's distant, and we don't want to instantiate models in that place. So it still receives row and column as arguments, but then instead of creating this object here, this anonymous object that has no name, we are going to create a new coordinate with fields row and column. And by doing this, I'm just giving a name to that object that was here. And when we convert this to JSON, the result is still the same as before. We are just giving it a name. Okay, so that's part one. We have models. Now we want to extract the thing that is doing the requests to the server. And I want to call this guy a repository because it's similar in spirit to the repository we have on the server. On the server, the repository talks to a database, and in this case, in the client, the repository talks to the server. But the spirit is the same. The responsibility, the purpose of the repository is to get games and make moves and do the actual change with the models. So I want to have the games repository. And the games repository is it's going to have a bunch of methods, and they are going to do these things, communicating to the server and everything. So let's start with an easy one, like move. Okay, so we are going to call this move, and we want to do it with a game and a coordinate. And we are going to do this part, except that we are going to receive the coordinate as an argument here. Now, here in the controller, I can call the repository to do this. So for the moment, I will have the repository as a global variable, another one. We are going to solve this later. And then here in move, I can just call games repository move with a game and a coordinate. A coordinate, I know how to create. It's right here. And then I can remove this line. But what game will I pass to move? What do I write here? Well, again, I'm going to use the trick of a global variable, and we'll get back to this later. So with that, now the controller doesn't know how to talk to the server. The controller knows how to talk to the repository. The repository knows how to talk to the server. And we can do similar refactorings for cheat and create and poll and so on. So I'm going to do that in fast forward. Okay, so we finished our refactoring. We extracted all the methods to the repository, and the game still works. I can reload, I can play the game, I can cheat, and so on. And a few things changed. First, this game identifier at the top level is no longer necessary. We are not using it anywhere. Game identifier, no longer used anywhere. Because we have now the identifier in this game that is still a constant, a global variable, but we'll get there later. And the controller now no longer knows how to talk to the server. It only knows how to talk to the game's repository. And the game's repository knows how to talk to the server and sometimes even updates the game object. So for instance, when you're creating a game, then you get a new game identifier, and that is mutating that global model that we have for game. Overall, we have a very good separation of responsibilities and concerns. We have an object that is responsible for modeling the game and an object that is responsible for modeling the coordinate. And if we were to implement more game logic, let's say we want to do latency compensation and we want to implement the rules of the game in the client, or maybe we want to check if the game is over. In all those cases, I would be adding that logic to the game class or to the coordinate class and so forth. We have an object that is responsible for fetching games from the server and changing games on the server, this sort of thing. So that's the game's repository. We have another object responsible for rendering the game on the screen, that's the game element. And we have an object that controls how all the other ones operate. So we have a controller that is capable of talking to the repository, talking to the element, and telling them to do stuff, but the controller itself is just managing other objects. It's not doing a lot of logic itself. And we have this utils class that is just a namespace for auxiliary methods. On the next video, I want to show you how to solve this problem, this bunch of global variables that we want to get rid of. See you there.